So after that riveting story about David and Bathsheba and Uriah, you might think that we need to talk about David and Bathsheba and the failure of the rhythm method. But I want to talk about miracles. So the gospel today is full of miracles. There are actually 3 of them. Most people see 2, but there's 3. The first one is the feeding of the 5,000 with a few loaves and a couple of fish. And that story appears in all 4 Gospels. It is such a key story about the ministry of Jesus, how he miraculously feeds 5,000 people. And the second miracle, which is described in all Gospels except the Gospel of Luke, is the Jesus walking on the water and calming the storm and taking the fear away from the disciples. Then the third one is in the final sentence, and most people don't notice it. It says they wanted to get him in the boat, but then all of a sudden they arrived upon land. It was as if they were transported with a Star Trek beam to the beach where they needed to go. Nobody ever thinks about that one. Christianity is full of miracles. From the birth of Jesus, conceived by the Holy Spirit to the Virgin Mary, to his death, because 3 days later he is seen walking and talking until he ascends 50 days later into heaven. And not just in Christianity, in the Hebrew scriptures, holy to the Jewish people, also full of miracles. The parting of the Red Sea, the stopping of the sun in the book of Joshua so that the army can fight all day, the stopping of the River Jordan so that they can cross the River Jordan and defeat the Canaanites. The Hebrew Bible is chock full of miracles from beginning to its end. Also true in a number of other religions, that there are stories full of miracles. Now, in early times, like up into the first few centuries of Christianity, these miracles were used as what we call apologetics, arguments to prove to people that Jesus is the divine revelation of God, that he's the Son of God, and that God itself exists, that there is a creator behind the universe still acting in the world. So you would say to people, look at these stories, proof that Jesus is God and that God is behind all of that. The trouble is then when we got to the Enlightenment and the beginning of the modern age, when a number of scientific discoveries, including archaeological discoveries, made people realize that some of the stories told in the Hebrew Bible were not historically accurate from our understanding, 17th century on, of what the historical accuracy looks like. Things based on the scientific method, facts, as opposed to stories. And as more scientific discoveries came to be, when we recognized that the earth was not the center of the universe, that we were instead revolving around the sun, all of a sudden people got jostled by this. They began to count less on miracles or to even believe in miraculous occurrences. And so starting in the 18th or 19th century, people started to explain away the miracles. So that feeding of the 5,000, well, what happened was there were thousands of people who had what that little boy had, a little bread and a little fish, so they all just pulled out their bag lunches, and that's how it appeared that 5,000 were fed by Jesus. Or another one is that walking on water. Well, the word walking on water in Greek is very similar to walking by water, so really Jesus was walking along the beach. In other words, they explain away all the miracles and just sap them out of the Bible and out of faith. Well, the problem with that, and I get this from a theologian named Douglas John Hall, so I'm stealing this from this Canadian theologian. The problem with that is that it takes the mystery and the wonder out of faith. And there's no way to really try to have a relationship with God or to wrap your hand around Jesus without accepting the mystery and the wonder of the divine presence of God in humans, in a specific human being capable of doing whatever. Now, I am not saying that Jesus did not do those things. I'm just telling you what thinkers in the past have tried to do with the Bible once other people started saying there's a scientific explanation for everything, so therefore these stories are just stories, just symbolic stories. When he's writing about this problem with people losing a sense of mystery and wonder in the world, he quotes a poem by Elizabeth Barrett Browning called Aurora Leigh, which many of you probably read in high school. She wrote, earth is crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God, and only he who sees takes off his shoes. The rest sit around and eat blackberries. The earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. So what's happening when you say to people, oh, those miracles, those aren't really real, is that people then lose the ability to see the real miracles going on. So the real miracle in the feeding of the 5,000 is that thousands of people were so taken by this man Jesus, his teachings and his healings, that they left their homes without any food. They were so eager to follow him and went somewhere to hear this man teach. That's the miracle. The miracle in the calming of the storm and Jesus walking on the water is that the disciples who were terrified, it says, terrified at sea, didn't think they could get where they needed to go, suddenly felt calm and were at peace when Jesus said, "Do not be afraid." The miracle of believing in the risen Christ is that other people believing that can see that there is life beyond suffering and life beyond death, even if we can't pray for our specific loved ones to rise from the dead. So it doesn't matter, in other words, that we don't miraculously bring people out of our graves today. What matters is it happened in his time, to him and a couple others, so that we would believe in that force and that power. That's the real miracle. You have to be able to trust that it's from God to believe it in order to see it all around. So I'll give you an example. Lately, we've had a bunch of Catholics join our congregation, which is wonderful. I come from a Roman Catholic tradition, and I became a priest at age 50. When I was at my previous job, we were in a kind of a big fancy church with a chancel up on several steps, and I was scheduled to preach that Sunday. And we had a guest priest, a guest Catholic monk who was going to preach and teach later at the adult forum. So I was to be the celebrant, which means the person who stands behind the altar and does the Eucharistic prayer that you're going to see a little bit later. I'd been doing it for 2 years, was accustomed to it. It's my favorite thing to do in all life. I always feel incredible peace and joy when I do it. And so at our church, what you do is I was sitting like, the Reverend Susan Estorita is sitting there. You get up, you go down out of the chancel. The altar guild puts this fancy, really heavy robe or chasuble on you, and then you wait for the amazing music to end. So the organ was swelling, 40 voices were singing, and just at the moment when I would feel joy, all of a sudden, I was stricken with absolute terror. Out of nowhere, absolute panic. My heart started pounding 130 beats per minute. My hands were clammy. I couldn't breathe, and I couldn't move. And I thought, what's wrong? What is wrong? This has never happened to me. I'm not afraid of public speaking. I'm not afraid of doing that at all. And then I thought, that Catholic priest is going to see me fall apart. And then I realized, aha! It's my childhood. It's the childhood that told me girls aren't supposed to be up there. Now, that lovely man, that lovely monk, had not said a single thing to me to make me feel that I was in any way not appropriate, not fit for the job. It was that old programming me. So I prayed hard. I waited for the panic to stop, but still my heart was going boom, 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 boom. And I thought, I'm not even going to be able to speak. And then I remembered, I have a job to do. My job is to get up there in that robe and to say those words, and all I have to do is read words out of the book. And if I faint, some other priest will get up there and do it for me. So what? So I got up there and I said, the Lord be with you, and you said, and also with you. And then I said, lift up your hearts, and everybody said, we lift them up to the Lord. And then I said, the thanks and praise. And as soon as I got, this is the right thing to do. We give you thanks and praise. The fear just went whoosh, immediately wiped out of my body. And I remember thinking as I was smiling away, that's a miracle. because I could see it. I could know it. The fear that came on, I don't know where that came from, but it was instantaneous. And the healing was just as instantaneous. So yes, I didn't have a man named Jesus come up behind me and touch me, but it still happened. Now, the challenge is that people have very different ideas about how to pray for things. Among this congregation, among Christians throughout the world, there are some people who say, I never pray for miracles, those kinds of things don't happen. So they would never pray, for example, for somebody's cancer to go entirely away, or for, what would be another miracle that people are constantly praying, for the test results to be good, because they don't believe in that kind of a miracle. They don't believe those things happen. I have other people who absolutely, positively believe, as many Christians do, that all of the healing power in Jesus' prayer is available to us too when we pray, and that we absolutely can and should pray for miracles, and they will occur. And then there are other, as long as we have enough faith, as long as there's enough faith in the room. And then there are lots of us all along the middle of that spectrum, where we're traveling along that spectrum at different times in our life. And Christianity encompasses all of them. Now I want to get back to that. If you have enough faith, it will happen. Because that can be a dangerous idea. So I was praying a lot. My mother was diagnosed with a terminal illness when I was 13, and I prayed and prayed a lot as a teenager. And as I reached age 16, I saw things weren't going well. And she was going downhill, and I had not yet accepted the idea in my head that she was going to die. I never quite did, actually, until she did. But my Aunt Gloria, love you, Gloria, uber Catholic, called me one day and asked how things were going, and I said, not well. And she said, somebody's not praying hard enough. Now, I think about it. I was 16 or 17, so I took that as any teenager would, you mean me. I'm not praying hard enough for a miracle. So I stepped it up. It was summer. I started going to Catholic masses in the early morning with elderly people, and I dragged my little brother along in case he was the guy who wasn't praying hard enough. And we prayed hard and hard and hard. And when we get to the open prayers of the people, and I would always say, and I prayed for my mother to be miraculously cured. And after a while, I'd turn around and I would see all these people, just their heads hang when I prayed that. Because they knew what I didn't know, that it wasn't looking good, wasn't going to happen. So she did die. And then I changed my prayer to, God, I hate you and I want you to go away and I don't believe in you anymore. Get out. 17 years old, lying in my dark bedroom. Every night, that was my prayer. Go away, you loser. And after a couple of weeks, it occurred to me that you can't say, I don't believe in you anymore if you're talking to it. So I was like, you're obviously not there because you didn't do anything. I don't believe in you, so go away. So I thought, well, that's very interesting. And then I thought, also, if I'm saying go away, which I was saying, really, get out right now, then I must think that God was nearby. And what fool would say there is no God, go away? What fool would send away the God that she believed was present? Because boy, did I need that God. So I decided to let God back in. I said, fine, you may stay. Sit there in the corner, please. I was 17. Give me a break. But I also learned, so what I got from that, and it should be quite obvious to you, is an intense relationship with God. A very close. I was praying so hard every day that I developed quite a substantial prayer life at an early age. But every time I look back at that time in my life, I realize other things I gained. For example, 2 of my teachers, one of my coaches and my English teacher, had experienced the early death of a mother. One at the same age, 17, she was 17 when it happened, and one when he was about 25 years old. So both of them were there to walk alongside me as my mother was getting near her time and afterwards. And they kept me alive, quite literally. They kept me alive. And I have gone on to lead a joy-filled life as a result. But nevertheless, I do not want to diminish the pain of praying for something and not getting what we want. Jesus says quite explicitly, pray for what you want, and the Father will give it to you. Now, surely you've had the experience where you've prayed for it and you didn't get it, and you were praying for a good thing, for a healing, for a job, for whatever, a marriage to heal, and it didn't happen, and you're thinking, what? Not enough faith, I'm praying for the wrong thing, there is no God, I'm not a good enough person, God is punishing me. People have all these different reasons in their head for it not happening. But I think that what is sometimes happening is that we get something else. That the answer from God is not the thing that we thought we wanted, but the thing that we most desperately need. The parental figures who've been through the same thing. The close relationship with God. The friend who shows up at just the right moment when you can't stand that empty moment of widowhood. That somehow God delivers at just the right moment. I've been very touched by stories I'm seeing on Peacock.com. I don't have NBC, unfortunately, as I watch the Olympics. And they're telling the stories of athletes such as Michael Phelps, the greatest swimmer of all time, 28 Olympic medals, 23 gold medals in swimming over 4 Olympics. Loved watching him as a swimmer, always thrilled to watch him as a swimmer. But after his second Olympics, when he'd already achieved feats that no other swimmer had, he plunged into a deep depression. And he is now doing a lot of public speaking about how he has suffered from depression and how he is trying to find other meaning in his life besides being the best swimmer in the world. Because what he'd worked for, what he'd hoped for, the only thing he wanted was to be the best swimmer in the world. And then he got it, and then he found out, oh no, that isn't apparently everything I needed. I needed something else. The same thing happened with Naomi Osaka, the Japanese tennis player who has been ranked the #1 tennis player in the world. And as you probably, if you follow sports news, you know that she dropped out of the last 2 Grand Slam events, partly to return to Tokyo for the Olympics to get ready for that, but also because she was experiencing anxiety and depression. And what did she say? My depression started when I won my first Grand Slam tournament. Now, you and I would think, you've been training your whole life to be a tennis champion, you get it, and you fall into depression. Why is that? It's because that's not everything they needed. Maybe God did make them tremendous swimmers and tennis players, but they need something else. My guess might be a sense of self-worth that has nothing to do with how we perform for others, a sense that we are loved beyond all measure. So they need to pray for something else. Several of us visit some of the elderly members of our congregation who cannot come here physically, and some of them are in hospice care. So they and their doctors and family have decided that no other real medical treatment for a cure is going to happen. And we ask ourselves the question, what should we pray for with them? What is the best thing to pray for? Well, I asked them, what would you like me to pray for? Because some people's prayer is, I want to go join my loved ones in heaven. Some people's prayer is, I want an absolute cure. I want to get out of here. The COPD is going to go away, and I'm back to my house. That's what I want. And who are we to say, no, I'm sorry, that's the wrong prayer? But I did want to point out to you that there's a pretty amazing prayer in Ephesians today. A prayer that is so beautiful in its simplicity. He says, I pray that according to the riches of his glory, he may grant that you may be strengthened in your inner being with the power through his Spirit, and that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. I pray that you may have the power to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth, the length, the height, and the depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses all knowledge, so that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. Think about that. Every morning, starting your prayer, your day with, I don't know what I'm going to get today, but I pray that I and you will be filled with the fullness of God. We can't always get what we want, but we get what we need.